Today we're going to carry forward the discussion of process costing. Previously we had discussed the existence of normal loss units or normal loss output and the scrap value attached to that and the impact that that has on the valuation of the or determining the average cost per unit of production. Now we want to talk about equivalent units. Equivalent units is a way of being able to express the value of partially completed output, or as we say, work in progress, WIP. In other words, at the end of a given period, we may not have completed processing all of the units that were introduced into a process, and therefore we end up with a balance of partially completed product. Now we have to express this partial completion as a percentage of the full monetary cost of the product. So if, for example, we only complete 35% of the costs connected with a complete unit, then we would say that the partially completed unit representing 35% of the full cost is effectively has an equivalent unit of 35%. The idea is really quite straightforward. Let's say if we're producing a table and we haven't completed in our production, we've only completed let's say half a table. That's supposed to suggest that we've built in only 50% of the material costs and so on, or in fact the total costs of this associated with producing a full table, only 50% are represented in the half table. We could say that this half table has an equivalent unit of half a table. If I look in the workshop and I have two partially completed tables, two halves, then my total work in progress would have a total value of one equivalent unit, simply adding together these two partially completed units. So it's a way of precisely quantifying the degree of completion and assigning a value to the partially completed item. Let's look at an illustration here. Suppose we have 200 units that are 100% complete with respect to the materials that are built into them, but 40% with respect to so-called conversion costs. By this we mean labor and overheads. So there's still some completion to be performed with regard to labor and overheads. We could look at this situation in the following way. Now, by definition, since the 200 units are not completely finished, they count as WIP items. They're work in progress. Any finished units, by definition, are 100% complete with respect to all input costs, whether it's materials or conversion. Here you can see in the table that we have finished units, 800 units, which are completely finished, 100% from a materials point of view and 100% from a conversion cost point of view. This means that in terms of equivalent units, the finished units are, the number of units is equal to 800 equivalent units. That's the easy part. We have to exercise care now when we look at the WIP units. We can say that the products from the standpoint of materials are 100% complete. So from materials perspective, the 200 WIP units are also in fact equal to 200 equivalent units. They have the same status with regard to materials as a finished good. However, with regard to conversion costs, here's the difference. Those WIP units are not complete because they are only have built in up to 40% completion with respect to conversion costs and labor and overhead costs. 40% means that 200 units of WIP units are equal to 200 times 40%, or 80 equivalent units. Therefore, when we take the total value of our finished goods and work in process, from a materials point of view, we truly have 1,000 equivalent units in our stock, in our workshop. But from conversion costs point of view, we have only 880 equivalent units. Now, suppose that the total materials costs for the production of these 800 finished units and 200 WIP units was $25,000. Then we could say that from a materials point of view, each unit has $25 worth of materials built into it. From the conversion cost point of view, if we have conversion costs accumulated of $5,000, those $5,000 have been accumulated to produce a total of 880 equivalent units. In other words, the conversion costs expressed on a per equivalent unit basis is equal to 5,000 divided by 880, or $5.68. This gives us now, this is per equivalent unit. This gives us now the basis to be able to value what we have in our WIP units. Let's just do that right now. So here are the values per equivalent unit: $25, this is for materials, and $5.68 is for conversion costs. So now we can say that the finished units from the standpoint of materials have a total value of $20,000. This is 800 equivalent units times $25 per unit. For the WIP units, we also multiply 200 units times $25 to obtain $5,000. So now we've got a breakdown of the $25,000 between the WIP units and the finished units. That's the easy part because they're 100% complete. When we go to the conversion costs now, we have to operate in the following. We have to value the finished units by the number of equivalent units, again 800 times $5.68 to get 4,545, and the WIP units, which have in equivalent units terms 80 equivalent units. Each equivalent unit has a conversion cost associated with it of $5.68. If we multiply that, we will come up with $455 worth of conversion cost value, which is built into those partially completed units. There may be some rounding differences here, but that doesn't disturb us. The total still has to reconcile to $5,000. Now, how does this relate to the process costing T accounts that we are used to handling? Well, again, if we look at process B now, the left side, the 1,000 units introduced are as they were in the initial scenario. We have no normal losses that are present in this particular example, but what we do have is finished units, 800 of them, which are ready to be sent out to the process C, and we have closing WIP of 200 units. These are not equivalent units, these are 200 partially completed units. We had to use the equivalent unit table here to assign a dollar value to that closing WIP, that work in progress, to those 200 units. And their value is 5,000 of materials plus $455 worth of conversion costs. So if we add across here, we can see that 5,455 is the value, the accumulated value of materials and conversion costs built into the WIP. And of course, the finished units would be 20,000 plus 4,545 conversion costs, 24,545. The two amounts reconcile, they add up to the total costs. Really what the process costing using equivalent units does for us is it allows us to break this number up into two pieces on a weighted basis so that we have an accurate reflection of the value of production costs that are built in to the 800 finished units and into the 200 units of work in progress.